Hello everyone, and welcome to another lecture with Hempology 101. Once again, we are very blessed to have a speaker who is very knowledgeable on the subject today, which is a really important subject to those of us who love this herb. Growing cannabis is important because if people didn't do that, then we wouldn't be smoking it. And so while very few of us really put the time and effort into growing, I think part of the reason for that is because it's often made out to be more complicated and expensive and difficult than it need be. And I'm very, very happy to have my friend, oh no, I butcher his last name, Daniel Boughen? Boughen, see, I butcher it. But Daniel has perfected in some ways the art of simple growing, and has a history that you will learn about today in horticulture that I think really has done him very well in using this plant, because it really is a simple plant, no matter how complicated some people make it out to be. And Daniel is here to tell us, how simple it can be. So once again, we're very pleased to have him here.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thanks, Ted, for the warm introduction. I really appreciate it. I always enjoy coming over to give to talk about 12-1 growing, which is, if I better straighten it out right now. I didn't invent it. It's actually something that came from a period around the 1800s. It's been noted in some horticulture books, but hasn't made it into the cannabis books because of the suppression of information on cannabis and cannabis production, cannabis growing. Anything to do with cannabis, they frankly didn't want us to know about it. So the information that has been suppressed has been well, we're bringing it out now. And it involves something called 12-in-1 method. Now, after trying this method myself, I got very good results immediately. I was introduced to it by my very good friend, Mr. Joe Pietri, and he showed me how. At the time, I was writing my first book, and so I included the technique into my book, along with another study that I was doing using diminished lighting. We eventually combined the two techniques and into a paradigm, which we call the 12-1 paradigm. Anyone who, if you're interested, you can find our group on Facebook called the 12-1 Army, Cannabis Wars, where we would run an open book where we teach all these techniques for free. What really kind of hooked me on the whole thing was when in 2011 I realized that my father, who was a horticulturist, had used this technique in Dawson Creek in the early 60s when I was growing up. He had a small greenhouse, and he produced bedding plants, poinsettias, for the local nurseries. And so he would grow these plants wholesale in his greenhouse and sell them to the nurseries to retail. So he was using this flash lighting technique to keep his poinsettias from going into flower until the required time, and then he used the diminished lighting as well. So what I'm going to cover, let's see. So we wondered, well, what can we do for our cannabis plants? Now, cannabis produces over 50,000 different products that we use every day. It has a potential to. The name cannabis means easily grown, and it really asks for little. It doesn't require a lot of fertilizer or it doesn't not much water, and it just grows everywhere. Sorry, I'm getting a little flustered. It's been a while, but I hope you bear with me. So, let's move on to here. So the present lighting system that we're using right now is most common for growing cannabis is an 18:6 lighting system whereby you have 18 hours of light followed by 6 hours of darkness. Now the problem with this is that the overly long light skews the growth and it wastes the fertilizer and energy. So you're actually using more fertilizer because the long days are making the plant be more hungry. Second, 6 hours is really too short a period of time to get any rest. It doesn't allow the energy to flow to the inside of the plant before the light comes back on again. So the plant suffers from somewhat atrophied inside branching. You can see that the tips of the branches will be well grown, whereas the inside of the branches won't be as well grown. They'll come out quite a bit thinner. Now, 18:6 also overly suppresses flowering hormones.
Did you have a question there?
I was going to say, do you have a mic? Or could you speak up a little?
I'll try to speak up a little bit. And
Sorry, I forgot my mic today.
yeah, sorry about that. Yes, also it creates excess heat produced in the room, and which also provides more stress for the plant. Anything we can do to de-stress our plants will help them grow and to be better medicine. So, in my experience, 18:6 is really only very useful for regenerating plants that have been flowered already once. Now, I don't know how well you can see that, but on the top drawing is an illustration of what it would take to have 18 hours of lighting on the plant. This is simply designed to show that 18-hour lighting is unnatural.
I'll just go flip the light off for a second.
Okay. In order to have 18 hours of light on a globe would require for there to be two light sources, as you can see by the lower graphic. It's a normal sun showing it, and you can see it shows only half the planet. So literally you cannot have 18 hours of sunlight in the daytime. So 18 hours is just wrong. It's just wrong. 18:6 increases the cost of growing by wasting energy, requiring unusual measures to sustain the plant's growth to compensate for the stress factors of heat and over radiation. So try to imagine you had to work at a job for 18 hours a day for say 3 months, allowing only 6 hours a day for rest to do everything that you need to do. It would be so stressful that it might kill you. And yet they're doing this to their cannabis plants, running high intensity lights for 18 hours a day. Can't be anything but it can't do anything but play havoc on all the systems. So I think I'll move on to that. Don't want to belabor that one too much. Okay. Another thing we're doing to our cannabis plants is we're flowering them under 12 hours of light. Now, the date that 12 hours of light happens is approximately July 21st, and it's still in the summer. So it isn't really time to flower yet. it won't be time to flower until the light drops below 11 hours of light. Now, you get some pre-flower and maturation action happening where some flowers will come out, but the main purpose of the plant at 12 hours lighting is for it to increase its size in order to have enough structure to hold the buds that are going to weigh down the branches. So it wants to gain size and strength, so that it'll be able to hold up to the giant buds that's going to grow in a few weeks. So 12 and 12 lighting is responsible for another problem that we all have in flowering, which is internode stretching. We end up with plants that have stretched a little bit too much for our room, and may have as much as 2 to 3 inches of stretch in between the internodes. This is kind of indicative that the 12-hour lighting isn't doing the plant any favors, because it's using its nitrogen to build stems instead of going into flowering. It's using its the light is overblown. It's not getting enough actual darkness to bring it into flower, and the additional leaf grown requires extra trimming labor, which of course increase your production costs. Cannabis falls in the category of short day plants, and is governed by the same flowering rules such as the African marigold and the poinsettia, which are commercially grown in the industry according to the guidelines set out for short day plants. Now, short day plants are defined that they must have a flowering period of less than 11 hours, or the plant remains partially in vegetation. Botanists have long classified all plants, including cannabis, according to the seasonal flowering behavior, and produced proven tables defining the length of season required for each genus to produce the optimum results. The centuries of work they've done, the archives of results obtained from meticulously studying short day and long day season neutral flowering plants. So every plant that you can imagine on Earth has already been categorized, studied, and written down, everything you can imagine about it for centuries and centuries and centuries. There's lots of information that shows that the cannabis plant needs less than 11 hours of light because of its nature as a short day flowering plant. I was reading a book. I was shown a book earlier today, by a new book by Robert C. Clark, and another author, I can't remember his name. I can't remember. He acknowledges the existence of the principle of the 12 on 1 lighting, but only devoted what was an inch maybe, an inch of space to the entire subject in a book which was over 200 pages long. Now, I'm afraid Robert C. Clark has got some things wrong. He's the author of a book called Marijuana Botany, and in this entire Earth there is really only one botany, and that is Earth botany. There's no cannabis botany, there's no marigold botany, there's no apple botany. There's just botany. It's plants, and all plants behave the same way, and within their species guidelines, and there's no special botany for cannabis. Mr. Clark has unfortunately taken the subject of cannabis and broke it down into so many pieces that it made it almost impossible to understand what is really something very, very simple to do. You don't need to know how much boron there is in your soil. You don't need to know the properties of the daylight in such detail as he goes into that book. You just need to know that the strong sun grows a beautiful cannabis plant, and the plant always knows what it's doing It has a job, only one job to do, and that's to be a cannabis plant. And it doesn't need very much help from us. Little water, slap it around a little bit once in a while. It kind of likes that. You know, don't be too gentle with it. You know, don't overwater it. Don't over fertilize it. Don't over love it, because that's one of the worst things you can do probably is love your plant too much. And I've seen lots of people literally love their plants to death. It's sad, but you know, it happens. It happens. And it's pretty common when people are learning how to do something at the start. They go a little overboard, and you know, it happens. So, okay, photoperiodic lighting. Photoperiodic lighting vegetation schedule begins with the 12 hours of light. Light goes off for 5.5 hours, back on again for 1 hour, back off again for 5.5 hours to complete the 24-hour cycle. Pretty clear?
So,
kind of looks like that.
I'd like you to explain, and I guess you're getting into that now, why you break it up and put some light in the middle.
Why to break in? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm going to get to that. I might not have these now. Here we go. Yeah, actually, in fact, I am. On the next slide. Okay, so photoperiodic lighting. Here's a little bit more of a representation real representation, makes it a little easier to see. Drops of vegetation energy caused by 22% immediately. Promotes better plant health and grows you better medicine. Promotes inner branch growth and causes increased yield on flowering. It allows the plant a double rest period, which tends to make them feel better. 2 naps. Wake up in the middle of the night and have another nap. It's a nice way to live. Resolves heat problems in grow rooms by not producing them. If you're running 18 hours of light in your grow room, you have to have exhaust fans, you have to have all kinds to draw the heat out that you produce, because there's too much. Healthier plants have fewer insect and nutrient problems. It actually uses less nutrients and requires less correction. If you use less nutrients, you have to flush less. What you don't put in, you don't have to flush out. Very simple. Now, here's a textbook that's written by Paul B. Nelson, 7th edition. This is a standard commercial textbook for commercial greenhousing, and it's used in universities. Paul Nelson's still alive, and he's at the University of Connecticut doing some very interesting work with short-day flowering plants, of course. In his book, he says the light break in the middle of the night restores PFR phytochrome level. That's the flowering hormone that I mentioned earlier. And since neither of the two dark periods before or after the light break is very long, the PFR level does not diminish sufficiently to permit flowering. 12-1 plants stay in a vegetative state and grow bigger and better with tight melons. The section on periodic lighting is located, ironically, between pages 413 and 420. I thought that was kind of funny. As you can see, he gives an extensive amount of attention to photoperiodic lighting. It's practically an entire chapter. PFR phytochromes are a light-sensitive chemical responsible for controlling plant season and reproduction. Now, flowering begins when the phytochromes build up to a saturation level. threshold. So, and then the cannabis plants will flower. Right, so by suppressing or allowing PFR phytochromes to build up, flowering or vegetation can be controlled. Oversuppression of PFRs, such as during the 18:6 lighting, is very stressful for your plants and concentrates growth to the very terminals or tips of along the far end of the branches. Allowing a longer night or using 12:1 lets PFRs fluctuate in normal levels, distributing more useful energy to the center of the plant and increasing overall output. At the end of the day, when the sun goes out, all the energy has been collected by the largest leaves at the very far tips of the plant. Once the light goes out, that energy is eventually transferred down to the next node and down to the next node after that. So if the lighting period, if the darkened period is too short to allow the completion of that process, the energy down to the inner nodes, then the inner nodes aren't allowed to grow any bigger, and you get the terminals of the buds will show all the growth. As Ted was asking, what does this do for our plants? It allows the phytochromes to build up, and in the middle of the night it drops them down a little bit, and then they start to build up again. But it doesn't allow them to get into the threshold. Now here's a little illustration of the 18:6 light. You can see that the blue line is the phytochromes. The black square is darkness. The yellow square is how much light. It's a representation, a 3/4 representation. The red line represents the threshold for flowering. Once the PFR phytochrome levels reach that level, the plant will begin to exhibit signs of flowering. Here's what happens during the 12:1 light period. As you can see, the phytochromes, when the light goes out, they rise a little bit. When the flash of 1 hour light is shown, the levels drop a little bit, but they rise again in the dark. Again, not far enough to reach the PFR phytochrome the threshold. Sorry. Okay, so 12:12 light, standard flowering lighting used by us by mistake for many years. It allows PFRs to reach the threshold of flowering, but only just. So the plant may be flowering, but it's not flowering hard enough to stop the vegetation from happening. Vegetation is still going on. It's still the plant is still growing lots of leaves, growing lots of stem, but not much flower. So if we drop the light to 10 hours, it has an entirely new effect on the phytochrome level, pushing it well over the threshold for flowering. The light comes on, the threshold is dropped slightly, but it rises back well up into the flowering range in the dark. Plants actually flower in the dark. That's where the flowering begins. Okay. Now 1014 was something I was playing with when I ran across Joe Pietri, and he introduced me also to the 12:1 technique. We decided to combine these two techniques into one paradigm. And so now the recommended growing regimen is 12:1 to veg straight to 1014 for flowering. Now, one of the biggest, what I think is the biggest benefit of this is the plants don't stretch. They only stretch 10% instead of 30%. Under 12 lighting, the plants will stretch up to 30% inside they'll stretch. If they're 18 inches tall, they may end up 28 inches by the time they're finished. What 1014 does is it keeps the stretch from happening, so that in fact you could actually grow your plants up to 20% large before you start flowering them, because you're only going to stretch 10% in height. The result is you're going to have a larger plant with more volume in it and more buds, and all of the inside buds are going to be healthier. You're probably going to just about double the yield of each plant that you do this way, because you can veg the plant larger before you put it into flower, and a larger plant gives you a much better yield, of course. So there's of course, again, there's additional power series, immediate explosive flower production. Often under 12 you can see it happening in a week or so. It should start flowering in about a week, they'll say. Not in 1014, 2 days, and you'll start to see buds busting out immediately. It's really quite extraordinary. It stops the leaf production and it saves a lot of trimming labor. So you're not trimming out leaves that you're not going to smoke. Grows only flowers, not leaves. Fuller and fatter bud production in secondary branches and nodes on the inside of the plant. Again, as the energy is from the daytime is passed down the plant, it has more time to reach the inside branches. It can receive the benefit of the energy and get that growth. So you end up with a lot nicer, more robust growth on the inside of the plant. Pretty good on the outside, sitting both the same, but not lopsided growth, where the buds are so heavy at the end of the branches that they break the branches. You end up with stronger branches. The weight of the buds is more evenly distributed across the branch, if that helps. And 1014 is just a sweet spot. So here's the 3 phases for growing. Oh, what's going on here? There we are. Okay. Of course, there's three phases to growing: the seedling phase, vegetation stage, and the bloom phase. Now, the seedlings like a nice bright start, so I recommend 16 hours of light and 8 hours of darkness. Not 18 hours is still too much, even for the seedlings. Don't give them 18 hours. Only give plants 18 hours if you already flowered it and you want to revegetate it, and re-veg it and take cuttings. That's when you want to use 18.6. That's the only time I recommend it. 24/0 lighting, never, not ever. It's just wrong. Okay.
Now, how long would you have it for that first stage of seedlings?
Until about 5 weeks.
Oh, up to 5 weeks.
And once you reach the semi-mature seedling, you can go to 12 and 1, and veg them from there to flowering.
And same for clones, 5 weeks.
For clones, you can put them right under 12-1. Forget about it. You don't need. They're already a mature plant, and they're ready to go. Once they have roots, they're basically a fully grown plant. They're just small. So if you have clones, take your clones, root them up, and go straight to 12 and 1. It'll save you a lot of time. And they grow like crazy. When I first tried the 12 and 1, I'd just gotten some cuttings from California, about 7 pretty choice cuts. I think it was Sour Diesel, San Fernando Valley OG Kush, him for a bunch of these things like that. I was nervous as hell, but I didn't. I rooted them up, put them under 12-1, the way they went. It's just, it blew my mind. It was great. Loved it. So, so fertilizers.
So what, under 12, how tall would you say plants have the potential? What would be the tallest plant you've grown, you say?
Cannabis plants can grow up to 20 feet tall, depending on the variety. Sativas grow very tall. They're equatorial sativas. Indicas tend to be more squat.
Yeah,
Shorter, kind of round, right? It's either a tall plant or a round plant. It seems
yeah,
to be the
exactly.
phenotype, right?
Both, right?
Yeah. So, but you can grow them pretty big. We're hoping, Joe Pietri and I are hoping to grow the world's largest cannabis plant sometime in the future. Try this technique and see if we can get it to do what we want it to do, you know. A little experiment. Okay, I'm going to got to tell you some bad news again about the about fertilizers and low light schedule. Now, unfortunately, most of the cannabis nutrient companies. Let's see, I wrote this out here. Have been they overprescribed the parts per million that you're supposed to use for cannabis. Cannabis actually runs very, very well at 400 parts per million of the various feeding compound. Now these fertilizer companies will recommend 1,200 to 1,600 parts per million. But you got to remember that they're counting on you using 18/6, 24/0, and 12/12 lighting. So the plants that are under that lighting need a little bit more because they're so stressed out because they're being just run like dogs. You'll need more food if you're under stress, and the same is true with cannabis. Once you can get over to a 12/1 or diminished lighting schedule like 10/14. You're going to use a lot less fertilizer. You're going to need less, and you're going to buy less. A few years ago, a lot of the fertilizer companies got together and decided their profit margin wasn't high enough. So they started diluting their products, which means that even though you can still get 1,600 parts per million out of your bottles, you're going to have to use more product to do it, which means you have to buy more. So they kind of got us without telling us. They by diluting their fertilizers, they've made themselves a little extra money by adding water. It's ridiculous. Now I recommend very simple organic fertilizers. A cannabis plant, it likes the same nutrients that a tomato plant does. High magnesium and just like a tomato. Now, I recommend that you try to stay away from cannabis specific products because they're no good. They're way too expensive. They don't give you what you need, and they've broken apart the formula into so many parts that it's almost impossible to use. There was an original formula called Cogos. It was a complete formula for cannabis. It had all the nutrients that you needed, and but the recipe was sold. And after the recipe for Cogos formula was sold, they broke it apart into 3- and 4-part formulas, and so that you could buy it one part at a time. Because guys like Robert C. Connell have made the whole fertilizer and nutrient issue so complicated that most people can't understand it. So go to a nursery, get some darn tomato food. It's great stuff. It'll grow you some great plants. Don't worry about any of that stuff. Molasses, all that stuff. Don't worry about it. Water, tomato food, and bloom food. Something with a high phosphorus content that'll give you very nice buds. Treat your plants well. Give them good food. Good old shit. Organic. Healthy plants also fight their own bugs. Some of the terpenes that are exuded from a plant during the whatever, like you said, whatever has gone into the pot has to come out.
Well,
But
that's,
there's
that's more what I was
also
focusing on. I'm like, if you're worried about nutrients
Right.
being left in and having a taste afterwards, I guess the final
Right.
flush would be the big thing, wouldn't it?
yes, it would. Yeah,
Right.
that helps to get all that stuff.
So would
out
that
there.
be like a 2-week for chopping, I guess, or
Yeah.
cutting down kind of
Yeah.
thing? Oh. Thank
A
you.
week. I'd give it a
Okay.
week.
Okay.
Not 2 weeks because you're dropping the nutrients too fast, and it can prevent the plant from having enough nutrients to finish.
Oh, okay.
So you don't want to starve it at the end.
No, no.
Yeah. So
Okay.
give it a week before, and as the end of the period comes, look at it and see if it can go a little farther.
Mhm.
You know, I like to look at my flowering plants and say, yeah, you know, I think I can go another week. Yeah, a week later I might, I can go another week. A few weeks later I'm like, oh gee, I'm sure glad I did that,
Yeah.
because all the real poundage and all the real action happens in the final weeks of the flower when
Right.
each one of the ovum begins to fill with resin and puffs up like a little popcorn, right? You know, it's quite awesome. They're beautiful. I just love the beauty of a pot plant, so
Mhm.
it's just another thing to appreciate about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, unless there's some other ones, I got some questions before your conclusions.
Sure, okay.
You talked about light in general, but I don't recall you discussing the difference between fluorescent 600 watt and 1000 watt. Can you maybe give your opinion of the different lights?
Well, between a 600 and 1000,
And fluorescence.
and fluorescent. Or the different types, different flavors of light, like
Yeah, and like, you know, which
halogen light and sodium light and fluorescent light. Okay, well, fluorescent light is very effective for use when you in the first growing time period of your plant. It's really useful for seedlings because plenty bright enough, doesn't give a lot of heat. You can actually overlight your plants with fluorescent light, and they'll just love it. So fluorescent light is very good for, say, you know, the first 4 weeks. The plants are between 0 and 6 inches or so, and after that you have to crank it up a little bit. I would step things up gradually. Say I might go from a very bright cabinet with 2,000 watts of fluorescent light into it to, as Ted suggested, the 600 watt halogen light to veg, and might step that up to 1,000 watt in the middle of the veg season, and then once the flowering time hits, I might add a 400 watt sodium light to that to bump up the light again and to bring along the reds to help finish flowering. So every light has its own niche use. So and they're all important because each one has a different flavor of light. Right? The sodium light has yellows and reds which simulate fall, and while the halides and fluorescence emulate spring and summer quite well. So I hope that answers your question.
Yep.
Awesome. That's what I like to hear.
And I'd like to ask about curing as well. You know,
Okay.
what is your recommended means of curing?
Slow. Slower the better.
How about in what? What do you tend to cure in, I guess?
I have a hard time getting it out of good. I often don't grow enough to actually cure.
Yeah, oh, okay.
So a glass jar works
yeah.
quite nicely. You know, you can get a big one and stuff enough in there. Keep open and close it every. Look for I believe it's 17% or something like that, humidity or something like that to finish.
Oh, okay.
But the longer you can cure it, the more the terpenes mature, and you get some oxidization, turning CBNs and CBDs, THC into CBNs and CBDs, which gives you some of the nice beautiful flavors that come out in the later part of the cure. I mean, everybody smokes uncured green weed. It can be pretty good, but it can always be better. Nothing like time. It is nothing like time to create a good cure. Fast jars and just a lot of care. And,
So it made me wonder, like when in Egypt they found that sarcophagus with that guy, like a couple tons of it. Or
yeah,
something
that,
like
that
I'm
must have been some
why
dry
did
weed,
nobody
eh?
taste that? Come on.
Yeah, that was some dry weed. Okay.
I think that's my questions for you.
Yes.
What do you think about LED lighting?
LED lighting hasn't lived up to its promise. You're better off to get some fluorescence. Even twisty bulbs are better than LED at this point. But one of the lightings that I've heard good things about is plasma lighting. I've heard that's pretty good. I haven't tried it yet though. It's sure some cool new stuff coming up, but I definitely wouldn't recommend LED lighting at this point. It's just not strong enough, and it has some really unusual effects on the finished product. It seems to make it come out with some really. I don't know if this is Photoshop, but I've never seen purple, orange, blue, and red in the same bud before in my life. Have you ever seen that? I mean,
No.
I mean bright neon colors.
Yeah.
If that's what LED lighting is doing to our pot, I don't want it.
I highly agree.
Yeah. Totally.
Here's the purple kush, man. It glows.
But why is it purple? Well, I painted it with a paintbrush.
Yeah.
Okay. How do I do for time, Ted?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. All right. We did even better than last time. Well, in conclusion, I have to say that the 12 and 1 and 10-14 lighting schedules have been astonishing. They've created a paradigm whereby the growing of the cannabis plant is made so easy because it's so low maintenance that it can't be anything but good because more people can do it. Sorry, I'm a little lost here. If you would ask me now why you should switch from the growing methods that you now use to the 12-1, I will simply tell you that in the coming world of legalized cannabis, anyone who is producing for the market will be guaranteed to be using this proven botany to cut costs and raise the quality of their products. If you don't make the change to a healthier, more sustainable practices, you will be driven out of the market by great weed at a fraction of the price. If there's any reason to do it, that's it. Because dinosaurs die. 1212 and 186 is a dinosaur and it has to die because it's not good for our lands. It's not good for people. It lights you up like a Christmas tree so that the hydro company can come and take you away. You know, I find it a little bit ironic that I'm giving a lecture on a practice that may, in just a couple of months, be illegal. So I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because I know that cannabis can help the planet, and everything about cannabis is good. There isn't a single thing about cannabis that I've found that has any negative connotation whatsoever. So here's to cannabis and here's to free life. Thank you very much. I have a book. If anybody would like a copy, I have them available. Only $20. Yeah, it's dirt cheap.
Is that where they are?
Oh, they don't. That one here.
Yeah, we've got to get it.
No, not really.
Should have had that out.
But
Just
the field, it's okay. Oh yeah, yeah.
All good.
I got here. I was just happy enough.
So did you see it?
I know it's filled out,
No,
yeah.
that's what the funny thing is like.
Here's my book.
I thought you.
I have a book for sale. It's only $20. It's a very thin book, 96 pages, but it tries to put everything that I thought was worthwhile. As you can see, growing cannabis isn't a very complicated subject. It's not a very big book, and I don't think I'll be writing many more books about cannabis because there isn't that much to
Well,
say.
no,
you know.
when you get
You've
the
done it.
secret down right,
Yeah.
you don't need to like do anymore.
Yeah, I might have to go on to something else.
I just can't wait till the whole Health Canada thing comes out and they're using the other method and you're just gonna sit there and laugh at them.
Right.
It's like, no.
Well, on the note of the changes, as Daniel said, in a few months' time, a lot of people in Canada that have been growing legally with licenses
Myself
will
included.
lose that,
Yeah.
and many are choosing to continue to grow and do it underground, find a new location, whatever it takes. I think that's one of the more appealing aspects of Daniel's method of growing, in that it cuts your costs and lowers the potential of hydro catching on to what you're doing as well.
That's right.
The
It's less-
most expensive thing with growing cannabis is the electricity.
hydro, yeah.
And so we're quite likely going to experience a drought in the cannabis community within 6 or 8 months' time, when everything kind of dries up from the current situation. And at that point, the prices will be fairly competitive, but the risk is quite high with mandatory minimums in place. So, doing everything and anything one can to keep their costs low and heat score low with it is a benefit. And I think Daniel's quite right to suggest that as time goes on and this method of growing is learned and shared by more and more people, this will become the norm. Why would you pay more doing it the other way? It just doesn't make sense. But I think
Why would you
it is-
deliberately spend too much money?
Well, yeah, but the reason for that has really been from within the industry itself. Not only fertilizer companies, but there's several authors of grow books as well that have really promoted the kind of more expensive means of producing this. And what I really, again, am attracted to with Daniel and his method is just the simplicity of it. That it is just a plant. You only need a book, less than 100 pages, to learn how to grow it. It's not as complex as others would make it. And the more complex it is, then the more people can make money from the situation. If it's as simple as growing some tomatoes, then that it isn't as much of a business opportunity for people.
Well, in the same sense of that, if they make it more complex, the smaller folks who have never done it before will stay away from it because
That's right.
Yeah.
it's just like, obviously it's too hard, right?
Yes, it's a deliberate mental deterrent.
And then it leaves it up to the government, and they're all happy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
get to control us somewhat.
So this
It's a huge control base.
is a really easy way for people to stay, kind of underground and provide for their own
Puts the control
needs.
back in your hands.
I've talked commercial a few times. Well, really, a lot of the patients are more looking at just sustaining themselves, and again, keeping the costs low is really important for them. And so, I just really like to thank Daniel for coming, and hope the video goes viral. And thank you all for coming as well. And next week I hope to have another guest speaker. I'm trying to line up someone that's I think it's the use of cannabis in general, I think is the topic next week. But I plan on getting a guest speaker for it. And again, thank you, Daniel, for coming over
My
from the
pleasure.
mainland. Always a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure.
And so have a great day, everyone, and smoke with God.
Right.